Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you're enjoying this show, do me a huge favor and leave us a 5-star rating and review. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today we're going to be talking to Bob Lachance. Bob is from Bristol, Connecticut, and played ice hockey for the Boston University, playing a pivotal role in their 1995 national championship team. With only 2 classes left to graduate, he actually dropped out of school to sign a professional contract with the St. Louis Blues. Now, he went on to play another 8 years professionally, 4 in the U.S., 4 in Europe. And at the age of 30, with his professional career over, he self-educated himself in real estate and began his career as an investor. Now, Bob has done a lot of things in real estate, including over 700 transactions, but now he started multiple businesses, with his main one being REVA Global, that's R-E-V-A, REVA Global LLC, which concentrates on offering trained real estate virtual assistants to real estate professionals. Let's welcome to the show, Bob Lachance.
John, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Bob. Listen, you've got a very fun background, and all of our sports enthusiasts would love to hear a little bit more about your sports journey. Why don't you just take a minute and talk to us a little bit more about your background and kind of what it was like going from playing hockey to getting into real estate?
Sure, absolutely. And I know a lot of your listeners probably are either thinking about, taking the next step in the real estate path or have gone through it as well. So hopefully this will hit a chord with many of your listeners. But this is back, I went to Boston University, like you said, from 92, 96, had the opportunity to get offered a 2-year contract with St. Louis. So I took that deal instead of finishing school. That was that was an interesting time because, when you're weighing finishing school and jumping into something that you absolutely have dreamed about since you've been a kid, it's a pretty interesting kind of challenge that you have going inside internally. So I did what any young kid would do. I said, you know what, I am going to take the money today. So I jumped in with 2 feet. I ended up playing in the St. Louis Blues organization in their minor league system for 2 years, signed with a couple other teams. And then my last 4 years, I went to Europe. I lived in Milan, Italy. I lived in Germany, Switzerland. So I've been fortunate to travel around the world playing ice hockey. It's something that I love doing. But I literally saw the writing on the wall towards the end. I got married. I had my first kid. I was living in Europe. My family was living back here. So it was kind of, that was very challenging in and of itself. So I had to really take a step back and say, do I want to uproot my family here in the United States and bring them over to Europe and, literally go from country to country to country? It sounds pretty cool, but it's not that glamorous, right? Your whole day is sitting in a hockey locker. I mean, I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I would, if I have to go back, if I ever go back and do it again, I will do the exact same thing because of the experience that I had. But life changes. Every year you get older and older and older. We were talking about that before. We were talking about glasses and the cheaters and all this kind of good stuff, right? But at 30 years old, I really had to make that decision to say, you know what? The best path for me was something either going back to school and or joining an industry where I didn't need a degree. So did a lot of research. Real estate kept coming down up to the top, I should say. I think everybody in the world has read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That was one of my first books I read. So I got really interested in it. So I decided instead of going back to school, I'm going to jump in 2 feet and jump in a real estate business. So that's what I decided to do.
Well, certainly everyone who's in real estate, or at least most people in real estate who are looking to scale leads have read that book, and certainly a big, driver for many people to decide to start thinking bigger. I got to ask the obvious question to me. You were 2 classes away from graduating. I get the decision to go join the St. Louis Blues, but when your career was winding down and you recognized that, hey, I need to go find something else to do, why not go back to school and finish those 2 classes?
That's a great question. And the main reason why I didn't is because I didn't want anything to fall back on. It may sound so weird in my life. I never wanted that safety net. And now I look at safety net different, buying passive income, that's my safety net, right? It's a little different than before. I didn't want anything to quit. I wanted to do real estate investing, but if I had that degree, it would have been easier when the times got tough to throw in the towel and quit. And for me personally, I've never been that type of person. I always wanted to make sure when I set a goal, I'm going to attain that goal. So if I had a fallback position at that time, you never know. I may have quit. And so that's the main reason why.
So you had made the decision that real estate was the path you were going to pursue when you were looking at your hockey career, saying, all right, this is winding down. Real estate is the next thing I'm going to do. You had made that decision. So it wasn't like you were trying to figure out what was next, really.
Exactly. So, and that's part of planning and everything that we do, right? So I read a number of books, Rich Dad Poor Dad being one of them. I also invested in an online course that I invested in. It was all about real estate, but all about nothing. But it gave me a really great look on what everything it is. It was all about, you're learning about door knocking. You're learning about marketing. You're also learning about multifamily. It was one of those big courses, 6 feet high, but you're reading everything. So it was all about real estate, all about nothing, kind of one of those things, but got me really, really focused into the real estate investing side of it. And again, I didn't know if I was a buy and hold guy. I didn't know if I was a rehabber, a wholesaler, a short sale person. I had no idea until I actually retired from hockey. And then I had no choice but to make money because my wife was looking at me saying, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now?
So. Yeah. And that's it, right? So you decide real estate is what you want to do. A lot of listeners right now are probably in a similar situation where they've made the decision that real estate is the thing they want to pursue, but they don't know if they want to be a buy and hold investor, a multifamily investor, a syndicator, a passive investor, active investor, a wholesaler. So how did you make a decision of where you were going to start?
Well, I knew that buy and hold, whether you're buy and hold, syndication, multifamily, that's a long-term play, right? So there's earned income, and I look at earned income versus passive income. Earned income is wholesaling, rehabbing, et cetera, right? You got to get those checks here today to be able to invest into multifamily, right? I know a lot of individuals that work either part-time or full-time that put money away, they have an opportunity at that time. That's their earned income to dump into passive income, right? But on the real estate investing side, I needed to make money today. So for me, it was getting into whether it's wholesaling or rehabbing because I read about that. So my first thing I did, and I'm fortunate enough to, I'm a go-getter, right? So I just wanted to make sure that, and when you have your spouse that is not looking over your shoulder. I know that sounds real bad. She's going to listen to this and say, oh my God, you're looking over my shoulder. But when you're first starting out, there is that pressure that you do have to succeed no matter what, because it's something that I set a goal for. So not only I put pressure on myself, but also when you have you have to feed a family, right? You have to feed your family. That's one thing you have to look at and say, all right, I'm going to go out there and pound the pavement. For me, I got my car, I farmed areas, which means driving up and down neighborhoods. I'm looking for any type of property that has overgrown grass, the dilapidated properties. So what I did is every single property I saw, I'd go home, I'd write down the address, and I would do what's called skip tracing. I'd go online, go to sites like 411.com, and I would do a reverse address search and see who the homeowner was and see if I could get a phone number. When I got that phone number, I would call them to see if they were interested in selling their house. Again, I knew I had zero systems. I didn't know anything about this. Also, every single property that I saw that had a real estate agent sign on it and the property was beat up, I also picked up the phone, called those agents, and said I was looking to buy properties. I'm a rehabber because at that time I was a rehabber. I didn't know any different, right? And I made an offer on this one property on right in West Hartford. I think it's Whitney Street. This is going back 2004. Property is listed is either 175 or 185. I made an offer at 135 and they accepted it. And I'm like, oh no. My first thought was, I'm like, all right, people, I'm reading this book that you have to make an offer and the money you'll find the money, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what happened though. Made an offer, they accepted it, found someone to loan me the money. I did have some money put away, but I didn't have the purchase money, which was $135,000 cash. I had all the rehab money. And then I had to go find contractors. Come to find out, fast forward a month later, finished the rehab. Well, we bought the property, finished the rehab, ended up making $32,000, right? Which was phenomenal, right? Everyone, people I tell that story to is like, oh, that's great. That's great. It is great. However, when you take a step back, you realize how messed up your business is. you realize that you have absolutely zero systems. You haven't marketed in 2 months. You haven't met anyone in 2 months because you're going back and forth to Home Depot about 1,000 times a day. Well, not 1,000, but a number of times a day going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you realize you really have to learn the business. That's when education for me, I'm like, you know what? Now I understand what education is, and I really have to associate myself, network myself into the real estate investor community. So that's exactly what I did.
Well, Bob, I mean, the first thing that stands out to me is you took massive action, right? You started farming your area, driving up and down the streets to look for properties. You found properties that look like you could get them under market value, putting in the offers. You finally got one. You got the money together to do the rehab, to get it closed, do the rehab, get it done. You made $32,000 on that first deal, but you recognize that in order to really build a company and have something that you can replicate and kind of make it a bit predictable, you have to start implementing systems. And a lot of people listening to this are in a similar boat where you're an investor, you're doing stuff, but maybe you're just like a chicken with his head cut off, right? You're just running around, doing stuff, getting it done, but it's not really a systematic approach to running a business. So how did you make that transition from just, driving for dollars, looking for deals wherever you could find them and not really knowing where the next deal was going to come from and not knowing what was in the pipeline, to actually starting to systematize your business and having more processes in place to be more predictable and to manage the growth?
That is a great question. The first thing I did is I actually found out where the network is where real estate professionals were hanging out. That's step number one. Step number two, I asked everybody in that real estate investing association, this was in Connecticut, who the top investor was in Connecticut. Because my mindset was, I want to meet who the best person is. And if I could work with that best person, again, I didn't ask for a penny, but my whole thought process mindset was, if I can meet that person and work with them, I will learn the ropes. So that's exactly what I did. Everyone pointed at the same individual. So I went up to him. His name is Pat. Said, Pat, you have no idea who I am, but everyone kept pointing to you as the top investor in Connecticut. I'm looking for any type of opening that you have in your business. Are you looking for an intern? Are you looking for an acquisition person? Are you looking for anybody? I'm willing to do anything. He said, actually, I'm looking for a door knocker. And I'm like, okay, at the time I didn't know. If someone ever said that to me today, I'd be like, you door knock, I'm not door knocking, right? But back in the day, I was very green and I said, you know what? Absolutely. I would love to do that. So what he did is he gave me, and I door knocked on pre-foreclosure properties. So those are individuals that were behind on their mortgage. So he gave me a script, he gave me a list, and he said, go. So every single Monday through Friday.
So much training. That's a lot of deep training. Here's a script and here's a list.
And of course he was available for me, but he gave it to me. He's like, go. And then what I would do is I would call him. So his thought process, he's probably one of the best mentors I've ever had, because his whole thought process was, he wants to see if I'm going to do it first before he spends any time with me. I'm like, all right. And this is what he told me after the fact. So I would call him all the time. Hey, this is what happened. He'd be like, okay, great. Here's how you handle it. Here's how you overcome this objection. So I did that for a year straight. And then while I was doing that, though, I documented all of my processes, every single thing that I did, because this is one thing that he told me as well. He said, listen, everything that you do, you got to make sure you document it with the idea of pulling yourself out and replacing yourself. So that's what I did. I documented everything. I brought on someone else to take my spot as a door knocker. And then I jumped in the seat of, I was negotiating short sales. We did 7+ hundreds of short sales within another 10-year span. So that I removed myself. Then I was then managing the door knocker, and I was then negotiating short sales while he was my manager. And then I rinsed and repeated, did the same process throughout. Systemize all of that part of the business like we talked about. And then, within that time started a number of coaching programs and then my virtual assistant company through the process. I know I'm fast forwarding it. We could take a step back, but I figured I'd give somebody the long look.
No, that's great. And I appreciate the long look and definitely want to dive a little bit deeper into some of those steps, right? So you meet Pat. Pat tells you, hey, come be a door knocker for me, gives you this list. You start knocking on doors and you document the process, you document the steps. And I know that at some point you kind of pulled yourself out of it, but walk me through a little bit more about kind of the documentation process And how did you actually pull yourself out? Did you just hand over the document to someone else, or what was that process like?
Yeah, so every single day, what I would do is I would do like a time in motion. So every hour from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., I would identify exactly what I was doing within those times, right? Every hour, I would document it. And I'd go back, each week I'd go back and then I would tweak and I'd tweak. And then before you know it, you'll have a systemized process on what you do on a daily basis. So I took all of that information, all the way from my script to any objections that I added to my script and my objections, and then I brought someone else on. This individual I found through the real estate association. He was selling door to door. This is actually really funny. He was selling door to door storm doors. So he moved from down south. He was the best door knocker I think I've ever seen. He blew me away. So he would actually walk up with a storm door and he would knock on the door if someone didn't have a storm door. And his pitch was, hey, he would knock on the door and they would open the door and he'd be like, see, he's got this door here. And he would tell them, if you had this door, you wouldn't have had to open this door for me. So he kind of did a pitch to him, made him laugh, and then he would sell doors. So he was the perfect door knocker for that particular role because he had a little bit of that experience. And he was very, very coachable. So that's just something that I would definitely recommend. If you're going to bring somebody on, make sure they're coachable and they actually are looking for, I guess, a mentor, if you will.
No, it's great tips there. I mean, one, documenting your steps, which I think most of us don't do, because if you had time, you wouldn't be spending your time documenting, but you have to have a long-term picture, right? One of the best ways to remove yourself from the business is to document what you do in the business and hand that off. And we think about, the most successful companies in the world. Everyone likes to go to McDonald's because they have so many, they're world renowned for their processes. I mean, regardless of what you think of their food, their processes are, world class. And I think that's the kind of thing where it tells you exactly how to do something. So the more systematic you can be with your processes and communicating that, the easier it's going to be to train someone else and remove yourself from that process. What were some of the hardships there? Because again, most entrepreneurs believe that only they can do it or no one can do something better than them. And I imagine going door to door, selling to, or convincing these owners to sell to you, that is a very high touch, high dollar, high value, interpersonal skill thing. Unlike just taking notes or something like that. So what made you comfortable to find someone and pass that off? Because most entrepreneurs would feel like it was a critical element of the business that they wouldn't be able to pass on to someone else.
Yeah, again, door knocking is one part of marketing, right? But door knocking, there's a lot of rejection in it. The reason why I started with it is because I want to learn from ground up, no matter what. For me personally, I was so green in the real estate investing median, if you will, or industry, that I wanted to learn everything. So I happened to, become acquainted with a mentor that wanted door knocking. So if he actually was an expert in direct mail, we probably would be talking about direct mail right now. So, but door knocking for me personally, there's a lot of rejection, right? I mean, you know that people are looking through the blinds, they're not answering the door. You're walking up, you're knocking on the door. It's a very humbling experience, but something that taught me again, work ethic and plowing through potential things that don't go your way, like someone not opening the door. A lot of times that beats you up psychologically. And for me, I always like pushing myself to the edge to make sure that, kind of like me not going back to school. Kind of one of those examples of, if you do some of the things that are extremely hard, everything else is going to be easier, right? That's why every time, playing sports, when I coach my kids' sports, we practice really, really hard. So when it comes to game time is going to be a lot easier than that practice. So that's the same thing I look at with real estate. I don't sleep that much. I listen to a ton of podcasts. We were actually laughing earlier about one of your podcasts you just had, one of my buddies. And I listen to a lot of podcasts because I just want to learn. I talk to a lot of mentors. I'm part of a lot of masterminds, read a lot of books, things like that. So I think when you immerse yourself into what you love doing and you put a lot of those hard work into it, when the game time comes, it's a lot easier.
No, great tips there. And I think to your point there, immersing yourself and working hard, you started to kind of to get to a point I want to dig a little bit on, about door knocking. And one of the big things there is really the rejection, that you're facing rejection. You kind of have to recognize that most of the people who doors you knock on are not going to sell to you. Many of them won't even open the door to have a conversation with you. How do you get comfortable facing rejection over and over and over like that and still kind of have the motivation, the energy, the positive mindset to continue on?
Well, for the door knocking, I'll call that youth. I will say I was 30 years old at the time. Right now, if I'm 46 right now. If I'm knocking on doors, I might be a little bit different, but I could relate that to today with cold calling. How's that? So today is a perfect example. A lot of investors, myself included in my company, we cold call. And rejection for cold calling is the same thing. What you're doing is you're outbound dialing to gauge seller motivation. After 100 no's, a lot of people quit, right? That's why I set up part of my virtual assistants that do all of our cold calling on a daily basis. So if I'm just going to pivot a little bit to today on the investing side and the mental side of it, it's for me, I take myself out and then I put someone else in, because there is a shelf life for a certain amount of, like, door knocking. There's a certain amount of time where just, your returns start going down. That's when you got to replace yourself and or bring someone else on to get new fresh mind into that position.
And I think too, like for many people, I mean, I think everyone is saying the same thing about how easy it is to find a deal right now, right? It's pretty difficult for anyone to find a deal that makes sense. And what can happen is you get very frustrated. And I think there's two different groups of people. There are groups of people who figure out how to still attack it with, ferocity every day and still find ways to, scour deals. And even if it's a needle in a haystack, you keep looking. And there are people who just simply say, hey, there's no good deals. People are buying deals right now. They're overpaying and whatever the case may be, right? And I think one of the things you just mentioned right there is there's a shelf life and you have to look at the best use of your time, but it doesn't mean you stop the work. You can replace yourself in it. So if you know what the process is, you can step out of that role, put somebody else in that role, whether that is a virtual assistant or a team member or an intern or whatever, and allow someone else to do some of that thing so you don't get burned down, especially if that there's a high chance that the work you're doing today may not, bear fruit. And I think, for me, that was one of the challenges I had, when we talk about underwriting deals, I would spend hours and hours every day underwriting deals just to realize there's no way in the world those deals are even close to working. And for me, I felt like I wasted time. Now, obviously, I was sharpening my pencil. I was learning what to look for and all those things. But nonetheless, I didn't have anything to show for, a week's worth of work, a month's worth of work underwriting deals versus other aspects of the business where I could show like, oh no, I have a new investor or I have a new podcast episode or whatever, right? And for me, I think I got it's easier to find things where you can show some progress versus when you're putting in that effort and that work, but you don't really have any tangible proof or results from that work. So how do you get comfortable with kind of the mundane, especially if it doesn't demonstrate a real result?
Yep. And, no, that's a great question. And I do want to anchor back to exactly what you said about pivoting, right? So let's just talk about marketing as an example, right? All of our businesses run on marketing, right? If you don't have any leads, you don't have a business, right? If you're a wholesaler, you don't have buyers, you don't have a business, right? If you're syndication, if you don't have the money, you don't have a business, right? So it's a lot of those little things. But if we just focus in on, let's say, marketing, for example, and I am going to focus in on door knocking. And it takes a while, so if I look at what I did last year, and last year I was getting one deal a month. This year, I'm getting one deal every 3 months. I need to add another marketing channel in there. So to go back to what you said, what we do now today, I don't do any more cold calling. Right? I was just giving an example of when I started and the pain that I went through when I started, right? My today self wouldn't be door knocking today, right? Because we're in a different world today with technology and things like that. We're going back 16 years ago, right? It's a little different. So what we do now today, we do text messaging, we do cold calling, we do direct mail, we do ringless voicemail, we do, outbound Zillow system, Craigslist system. So those are like, I don't know, 7. I don't have enough fingers here on one finger. We're looking at each other. This is kind of funny. We're looking at each other and I'm counting on all these fingers. But if you start looking at all those are all different systems, and done consistently yield leads, right? To where, maybe the cold calling might not be as many leads as last month, but they might be more leads than the month before, right? And text message, same thing, but they compound on each other, right? It's like the compound effect by Darren Hardy, that book, Compound Effect. I don't know if you ever read that book. Great book. It's everything compounds on each other. It's all consistency. So when you start looking at your business, you look at all of those systems that you do, you perfect it. You don't have to perfect it, but what you do is you start it and then you outsource it. Start it, outsource it. So for me, like I said, when I first started real estate, I would get that list, I would skip trace it, and I'd be the one cold calling. Now I get a list, my virtual assistant skip trace it, and they're on the phone all day long from our time is 10 to 5 right now. So that's my calling time with our virtual assistants, with the idea for them to get someone who raises their hand, a seller that says, yes, I would love to entertain an offer. That's all I want. Then they could pass that warm transfer lead, we call it an ITS, interested to sell, over to myself or my acquisition person. Then we take it from there, right? Same thing with text messaging, because text messages is the same. If you want to create a system, this is a very good visual, right? Compile a list, skip trace that list. And what skip traced in the list means, it's getting the best phone number for that particular record, for that particular list. Then you have a virtual assistant. You can upload it into what's called an auto dialer, and you can have your virtual assistant just call on the phone every single day. Typical rates you'll find is they'll probably connect about anywhere from 20 to 23% of the dials they make. And out of that number, you'll get a percentage that we like to call the ITS rate, which is interest to sell rate. And those are all the leads that you'll get into, sent to you by your virtual assistant or by our virtual assistant. So a very simple system. And you could take out the calls and add in text messaging and add in ringless voicemail if you want, but that's the same outline of that system. Did I confuse you, or was that kind of vivid enough?
No, I got it. I'm going to recap it just to make sure. Okay. And I want to talk a little broader, right? Because I think the thing that you're hitting on is really just it's a comprehensive marketing plan, and I'll bring it back to that. But what you were talking about was, really compiling a list, skip tracing that list, and kind of having that virtual assistant tap in, upload it to the auto dialer. And then from there, as you're reaching out, having those conversations, once you get someone who said they're interested to sell ITS, that's when you can take that warm lead and kind of move them on and see if you can go ahead and convert them. And the fact that, that is from, the compiling the list and skip tracing it, but there's, different marketing channels that you can pull, whether it's, social media or text message, as you said, driving for dollars, whatever the list is. The list is, is just where the leads initially come in from. But the process to start engaging and reaching out, has some various varying elements, but overall the process is pretty much similar. The thing that I'll say is that this is true for any marketing plan, any company. You take one of a Coca-Cola or Pepsi or someone like that, it's a similar thing. They don't spend all of their dollars on TV. They've got TV, they have print, they have out of home, they have radio, they have, banner ads, they have a website, they have social media accounts, they have a social media ads, Facebook ads and Instagram ads, and they have their content that they're developing, right? They have in-store displays. So they have all these different components to help convert you whenever and wherever it's most relevant for you. And you should be thinking about building your marketing systems in a similar way. Now, obviously, most of us can only take on so much at one time. But you do, the thing I love that you're talking about is if you only door knock, then that's the only means you have to generate leads, and your time is finite. So you can either get more door knockers to make that work, or you start exploring other strategies or other channels. And I think this is true for, again, any marketer, anybody in general who is, looking for leads to grow their business. If you're a real estate agent, if you're a multifamily syndicator, if you're a flipper, you've got to think through multiple leads, multiple streams of leads to figure out how do you execute your business. And if you're only relying on one, well, then you're going to struggle, and I think that's one of the big things you could take away is how do you diversify, but then also create processes that someone else can take on some of that work. So you're not sitting here trying to do it all by yourself, but you can pass some of those things on to an intern, a VA, or somebody else in your team. With that,
and John, let me just add to that 2 seconds. One thing I miss, because a lot of times when I've been in this industry for so long, one of the things I do want to make sure I highlight is start with one. You have to start, right? And I do want to stress that, because if you don't start, it's always tomorrow. I'm going to do this tomorrow. I'm going to do that tomorrow, right? If you decide to cold call, then please start that process and cold call today. If you decide to do, any Craigslist, just do Craigslist, and then get that. What happens is once you keep doing it, you get in a repetition, right? You keep going and going and going. Then you outsource it and then add something else. But get started, because that is the main thing. If you don't get started, then you're going to be, you're never going to get started.
No, phenomenal. Thanks for adding that, Bob, because I think that's really important for our listeners to know. I want to talk about real estate virtual assistants, because we've started hitting on it a little bit. I know that you've created your company to help other investors as well. Why exactly did you start real estate virtual assistants, and who should be looking for an assistant?
Great question. Well, first thing I noticed, whether anyone who jumps into the real estate industry, they're looking for one of three things. Number one, they're looking to either scale their business, right, to grow their business, make money. Two, they're looking for more time left in their day, time back, right? Because real estate professionals, number one, if they're looking to scale, that means they're taking more time out of their day. So time is going to be a challenge. And the last one is efficiency. So if you go backwards, what I said is efficiency, scale, or time. Those are one of the three things when you start looking at your business as a real estate professional. Those are the things before a year. Let's say it's January 1. You say, all right, New Year's resolution. I want to get more time back in my day. Well, what does that really mean, right? Time means something different for everybody. So I realized that time is sometimes limited, right? Efficiency is always a question. How do we do more in less time? And scale is a question. So what I was looking for took me about 4 or 5 years, 6 years of data and looking at what the best way was to fill that void. And in 2013, I got introduced to the virtual assistant world. And I never even knew what a virtual assistant was, right? Until that, I listened to a podcast, or no, it wasn't a podcast, it was a webinar back then. Listened to a webinar 2013. I'm like, wow, that's exactly what, those three things signify. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I got my first virtual assistant, and then 2014, a light bulb went on and said, you know what? This is a great business model to be able to offer real estate professionals and real estate investors, whether they're property managers, agents, brokers, investors, it doesn't matter. It's all the real estate professional environment. That is a perfect business model. Obviously, on the business side, I had to figure out how I'm going to start that company, right? But I launched it in 2014 and then created a training program behind it on the real estate investing tasks or real estate professional tasks that attach to, right now we're talking to real estate investors. It would be real estate investor tasks to help them, either scale, get their time back, or make them more efficient.
So those are the three things: timing, getting more time back, scaling, or being more efficient. I think for many listeners, if they haven't heard of a virtual assistant, everyone's heard of an assistant, but if they haven't heard of a virtual assistant, I know one of the concerns many people have, at least when they start thinking about the concept, is, well, this person's not here. How do I manage them? There are obviously a lot of VAs that are in different countries. Are those concerns warranted? And what are some best practices to overcome them?
It's funny. So that is a fantastic question, because that's one of the things that I always worried about too. When I got my first virtual assistant, I said to myself, how do I know they're working? Are they going to show up? Are they on break? Are they taking over break? Like, what are they doing? Right. So what we did within our company is we created start of day reports, end of day reports, We also created, when a client first signs up with us, we have them fill out what we like to call a success map, a client success map for 90 days. So then we know exactly what the VA is going to do, what the results are and expectations are. So now at the end of each day, there's an end of day report that says, all right, they made this many, as an example, they made this many calls, they connected this many times, and they sent this many leads to you, right? They ran this many comps, they took this many inbound calls, etc. So it gives you a snapshot of exactly what that virtual assistant is doing on a daily basis. Also, we set up either, whether it's Skype, Glip, Viber, whatever it is, to communicate with your virtual assistant anytime you need them. Right there, it's just like me and you, right? We're not in the same area right now. It's kind of like if I'm going to send you a message and I'll send you a Viber, it goes right to you, boom, you answer it right away. It's the same kind of concept. It's anybody. The way I look at it, there's a reason why the virtual assistant world is around now, because a lot of big companies are going virtual, right? They're going, give an example, my niece, we bought a 3-family property. It's really 2.5 family property here in West Hartford, Connecticut. My office is on the 2nd floor. My niece is working in New York City. She's taking a stay-at-home job, work from home job, and is living up on my 3rd floor. So that's a perfect example of her working with her company out of New York and servicing all of the United States.
Love it, man. So, I mean, and we know that the virtual world, right? Just living virtually is something that is becoming more and more prominent. If you're skilled, whether it be freelancing or virtual, that is becoming a much larger component of the employment force, not to mention also kind of the gig economy, right? Where, people are working small gigs at a time as opposed to, just signing up to work for someone for the next 5 years. So that's something that is big and definitely something people should pay attention to. I made a couple of notes here because I wanted to make sure I didn't forget a couple of these questions I wanted to ask you. One is, when you think about virtual assistants, what kind of skills do they have? What kind of work can we look to provide or give to a virtual assistant?
Great question. I break that up into 2 different kind of skill sets. One is, phone work. We call them a inside sales agent, an ISA. And the other skill set would be more admin skill set. So, for instance, some admin skill sets would be posting on Craigslist, posting on Facebook, posting, uploading all of your content to your website as an example, right? Managing your direct mail, managing your CRM, managing your calendar. The other side of it would be, and again, we have 100+ task list of all those things. If you're a real estate agent, it's uploading all the content to the MLS, posting all of your property showings, etc. On the other side of it would be your phone admin, right? Or not your phone admin, your inside sales agent would be, inbound leads. So if, you send out all of your direct mail and the phone rings because you're working part-time or full-time, you want to make sure that phone is answered, I should say. Your virtual assistant will answer that to gauge seller motivation and send you over to warm lead, as an example. We have our virtual assistants do outbound calling. Another huge one and very, very common task is follow-up. We have a very systematic follow-up system. And the best way I could explain it is, we as real estate investors spend a lot of money on leads, right? Whether it's direct mail, we're sending out direct mail. If we get a call back in and we don't answer it live, but we call that lead back and they don't answer, how many people really call that person back the second time, right? Not many. I'm part of a lot of masterminds. This is a pain point with all of us, right? Me, it used to be a pain point in my office until I brought my virtual assistants on. I created a follow-up system to make sure that every single day they're following up on my old leads. So they're following up on leads from a year ago, and we're closing deals from a year ago leads because they weren't ready, right? So that's a really big one. Because think about this. You do a direct mail campaign this week, another one next week, another one next week, and before you know it, you're 6 months down the line. Well, all of those leads that came in 6 months ago, majority of the real estate investors do not follow up on them because they want the low-hanging fruit. Whatever comes in today is the hottest button for them to get, right? And it's tiring. it's extremely tiring to follow up on old leads. So that's a big one. That's a phone. That's an example of a phone virtual assistant.
Well, and I think too, like that's where the systems come in, right? Most investors won't follow up for the reasons you said. It's tiring. It's probably not the highest percentage of conversion of what you can do. But if you have a system in place and you can put that task on someone else, then it's worth it. So definitely another, just kind of another reason to be looking at a virtual assistant. The
Yep.
last question I want to ask you on this is, I hired a VA before, and I had mixed results where it worked great for about 3 months, and then it just kind of went bad shortly after, to the point where we had to just decide to part ways. When you have clients that hire VAs, not just for you in an REVA, but generally speaking, when people hire VAs and it doesn't work out, what are some of the reasons why?
Some of the reasons why, within a certain amount of time, if some of the reasons why, number one, here's what I'm seeing is that the expectations are off at the beginning. So for instance, if you have a client that expects a virtual assistant to do 10,000 calls in one day, right? That's just unrealistic. So what I see are expectations aren't set correctly right up front. So I think that the stuff that we've done as a company from 4 years ago to today are to make sure that expectations are set right away. Because, there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of information around the internet that someone might have gotten and said, hey, my expectations are that this virtual assistant should be doing 10,000 calls in a day, or this virtual assistant should be closing all of my deals. They should be running my company, right? There's an expectation there. And the way I break it down, I say, you know what, if you can't expect a in-house employee to do the things that you want a virtual assistant to do, you're a little kind of thinking things the wrong way, because virtual assistants are incredible to take over the tasks that will give you 20 to 40 hours back of your time. I like to say if you're doing $10 an hour tasks, you typically have a $10 an hour bank account. Right. So you got to look at that direct correlation of that. I heard that on a podcast as well. Loved it. So I had to use it again. But you have to start looking at the tasks that drain your time, that really don't, they're more of the administrative tasks that you could outsource to someone so you could spend time on the money generating activities. We like to call them income producing tasks versus non-income producing tasks. Right. I mean, think about that. If you're doing $10 an hour task, that's $19,000 a year, right? If you're doing $20 an hour tasks, you're talking about $38,000+ a year. So, I mean, for me, I want to do $200, $300, $400 an hour tasks to make sure you're making $200,000+ a year.
Yeah, and great tips there. And I think too, just the clarity, right? So if you're going to do administrative work or pass that administrative work onto a VA, being clear and giving them kind of a system and a protocol that they can execute. I mean, in retrospect, I knew where I messed up was I had a VA who was trying to help me create content and expecting them to be able to write about, blog posts about pretty complex topics within real estate investing, just wasn't a recipe for success to begin with, right? So part of it is also just recognizing what are the things you want this person to do, and not just trying to replicate yourself and giving them everything that you do, but really saying, all right, if you have a writer, great. What are they writing about? Focus on those things. If it's more administrative work or sales, inside sales calls, making sure that you're clear with the process, but really setting them up to succeed like you would any employee. If you were hiring anybody for a job, even though they could probably learn different jobs, you wouldn't give them all the jobs at one time. Going back to that McDonald's example, if you're hiring someone to be a cashier, they're going to be a cashier. You don't tell them, hey, be a cashier, and you got to cook the food, and you got to work drive-through, and you got to, be the assistant manager too. It's like if you put all that on one person, you're setting them up for failure, and it's not really fair on them, and you're just going to be disappointed in the end.
100%. And I always look at it, the 4 R's of hiring, right? You got roles, responsibilities, requirements, results. Just like you said, you got to know exactly what role that you want within, when you're bringing someone on. And on top of that, you have to make sure that we all have to make sure that we know the exact tasks that we want them to do. Because if we're not clear, they're not going to be successful. right? It's going to be very, very challenging for them, for anyone, even if they're sitting in my office, right? I can't expect, like you said, can't expect my bookkeeper to come into my office and all of a sudden I want her to hammer the phones and gauge seller motivation. It's going to be a little difficult just because that's not her skill set or his skill set.
Absolutely. All right, Bob, are you ready to go into our bullseye round?
I'm ready.
All right. How has a failure or an apparent failure set you up for later success?
Whew, good question. All right, I'll tell you a failure. And I cover this on talking to one of my buddies, but a knockdown rebuild in Greenwich, Connecticut, where I've never done a knockdown rebuild. That's about 2 hours from my house. Got sold in, the shiny object syndrome, got sold into a deal. It's one of those deals where you had to get on it right away, right? Lost $150,000. Yep. In a deal. Actually, it's a little more than that. I keep telling myself it's only $150,000 because we actually had to hire an attorney for $475 an hour to try to get our money back. So it's really an extra 10 grand. So we had to walk on that. So my takeaway there is, just be careful about the shiny object syndrome, especially today. You got social media, you got the internet, you got all people that are just, flashing all the stuff that's just not true. And there's nothing out there that it's, you're going to get rich quick. There's zero get rich quick anything. I tried a lot of them. I failed in a lot of them. I'm sure a lot of us did. But in your younger years, that's sometimes when you get caught up in that stuff. So don't get caught up in any of that stuff.
What is the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year?
I would say book Leadership by John Maxwell.
All right, give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
A digital resource. How about a resource will be an outbound dialer. So I use a company called Five9, but there's a lot of our clients that use Mojo, like a Mojo dialer. It's been very, very helpful for a lot of our clients that want to do outbound dialing. Also, a text message platform that I use called launchcontrol.us has been really good. So there's two kind of platforms that I've had success with, or three of them actually. I give you three.
What is a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
All right, if you could see behind me, I have a Making of a Champion tape. You can't really see it. It's something at this time, it was my girlfriend, my wife now, gave it to me when I was struggling in hockey. And it says, there's a saying here that I had to say every single day when I was struggling and when I went to BU my freshman year. But it says, the most important qualification for becoming a champion is an intense burning desire. So say that every single day. Love it.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
I would 100%, there's two things. Number one, I would get a mentor right away. And real estate education, in my opinion, is a must, right? So you got education, mentor, and I would start working with a team as soon as you can, because I am really, really big on working with people, because for me, it's a lot more fun, number one, but number two, you can learn a lot more. And number three, you could grow a lot quicker. So if you start working with individuals that could take off some stuff out of your plate or off your plate, it'll allow you to do the things that you are best at and help you grow.
What advice would you give to a smart-driven college student about the real world?
The social media, half of the stuff you see there, don't believe it. Don't believe a lot of the stuff that you see. And here's why. It's just because the real world is you're going to work your butt off, right? There's no handouts. No one's going to give you anything. You got to work your butt off. And that's okay, because working hard is a lot more gratifying in the end. You work hard, you work smart, and don't expect anybody to give you anything. You got to work for everything that you get.
What are you curious about right now?
What am I curious? I'm curious about starting a podcast. It's one of the things I'm curious about. So you have inspired me, so I really appreciate that, just seeing all this. So, but that's one thing I'm curious about.
Well, I will tell you, starting a podcast is great. It is demanding, but the good thing for you is you already have virtual assistants in place. So you just need to add someone else in that role to kind of help out, and you can make a really nice transition into it. So it's good.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned that you are in Connecticut still. Give me the best place to grab a bite in your city.
I would have to say Brico's. It's an Italian restaurant. It's very good. Very good.
All right. For our listeners who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach out, Bob?
Either by my website or directly at my email. My email is bob@revaglobal.com. That's bob at revaglobal.com. And then obviously our website is revaglobal.com. So revaglobal.com.
Excellent. Well, Bob, listen, you walked us through kind of your journey from, dropping out with 2 credits or 2 classes left to pursuing your dreams of hockey, transitioning into real estate, focusing on, knocking on doors and really scaling a business and creating systems and, ultimately, creating REVA, where now you're helping other people create the systems and leveraging virtual assistants to grow their own business as well. So this has been a lot of good information, and I think really timely for a lot of people as well to think about where they're at in their business, how they can scale to either A, create time, scale, or drive efficiency in their business. So thank you again for coming on, Bob. We look forward to staying in touch.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.